Good afternoon. As he told you, I'm Eric Converse. I'm the CEO of Amra Medical. And we are just starting our fundraising discussions, so I'm here just to raise awareness. Today I've announced that we've just hired our CFO, who will be driving all of the modeling and the investment presentations, so that is to come. I'm just introducing you to where we are right now. So we focus on imaging analytics from MRI imaging, and we're using our patent-protected artificial intelligence to provide an analysis from MRI imaging. You can see what we're measuring right now is fat and muscle measurements. We're doing visceral fat, adipose tissue fat, liver fat, muscle fat infiltration, and thigh muscle volume. There's a plot here that you can see, and if you can see the blue star in the middle, that represents someone who is metabolically healthy. As they travel away from that center and down each axis, you can see where they're showing different indications of subphenotyping. When we're there today, we're working on clinical trials. We're also producing some data which we're able to sell for pharma to help them make decisions when they're setting up a clinical trial. Eventually, where we'd like to go, though, is to clinical use. And right now, we are working to put together that plan, and part of the investment we'll be looking for is to build out the team for clinical use. This just shows you a visual of what it is we're measuring. So you can see the blue is the subcutaneous fat. Inside of that, the pink is the visceral fat. That's more the unhealthy fat you have. And then in there, what you can't see as well is the liver. And then the other image is the muscle measurements we're doing. And just to explain what it is that we're doing or how the process works, we have a MRI site which we are certifying that they understand our protocol. All they have to know is our protocol. There's no software downloaded. It's just the settings instruction. The person's in the scanner for 6 minutes. Those images have a secure transfer to our office. Our artificial intelligence is actually then doing all the analysis work on the images, and it's producing a report that goes back to the client. Most of the times, it's a pharma company. So you can get an understanding of what that report looks like. We also have a health and wellness piece. So this image on this side here, that tells you as an executive in a wellness program how your measurements are comparing to the population as a whole. That's more informative, that is not reimbursed, but that is just a taste of our clinical use. But most of what we're doing right now is for clinical trials, so we're simply supplying an Excel spreadsheet with all the data they're looking for. We can do images as well, but again, that's not something that's in high demand. What really attracted me to Amra, because I took over as the CEO in October, was I had been working for 2 years on real-world evidence with a large pharmaceutical company. And we were bringing in all these companies who were talking about all of this real-world evidence they were able to present to pharma for further research or for insurance negotiations or any type of marketing efforts. What was missing there was imaging. And having just come off of being a CEO of an imaging CRO, I couldn't help but notice that there's something missing in this picture when you're looking at longitudinal patient data. So Amra, with its body composition profile, is actually filling that piece and adding to the data so you're getting a better understanding of the patient's health. Where I see us today is we are a research company with clinical trials going into clinical use, and that's along this axis, and our health and wellness is giving them some of those insights. But we're also down here a data company for real-world evidence. We're currently the imaging for the UK Biobank, where you have 5,000 participants from the population, 100,000 of which are being imaged with our imaging. 25,000 so far. We have done 13,000 to date, and we had Pfizer funding the first 7,000. Either direction we go as far as clinical use or more data as we gain more databases. Right now we've just won one in the Middle East and also one in Asia, so we get a better representation of the global population. Either way, we think we'll have success. What we'd like to do is get both of them, because as you're entering clinical use, if you can continue to feed that real-world evidence, you've got quite an offering to pharma and others for the data. A bit just about the company. It was founded in 2010. I joined in October of last year, so we had 30 employees. We're quickly climbing to about 38. I told you a little bit about my background. It's imaging for clinical trials, and then my experience with real-world evidence, which is what really brought me to Amra. Industry Funding was one of our initial investors, and then 2 years ago, Novo and Pfizer joined us. And last year, we ended with some pretty good news. We had our CE mark renewed. We had an audit for the new ISO standard, and we passed. And then we were awarded our 510K FDA clearance in the US in December. The point of our initial story is that you have 6 men here with the same BMI. So in looking at them, you would think they were the same. However, when you look at their visceral fat, you see it varies quite greatly from 0.7 liters to 6.3. And what that's doing is indicating that there are different metabolic risks. And if you don't see this information, you're not going to know that. As you can demonstrate here between 2 twins, you see twin B is actually heavier, has a higher BMI, and a larger waist. But when you look more specifically into the body composition, you see he has less visceral fat than his brother, and he's carrying his weight more along the subcutaneous region. So he's actually the healthier of the twins, but by looking at them, you would assume the thinner one is the healthy one. And as we're speaking to more and more people, we're just building our credibility in our offering and our science. So this is just a list of some of the collaborators we've had. More specifically, we were recently at the AASLD in San Francisco where our poster was accepted with distinction. And what that means is that we have been able to show why the BCP measurements that we're offering are important for liver trials. The nice thing about that, the KOL Arun Sanyal, who closed that conference to a full auditorium, was speaking to the audience with our images behind him, telling everyone that if we're going to treat the liver, we're going to have to take a step back and treat the whole system around it. And he was using our plot that I showed you earlier, that star, as an example of what pharma needs to do. Fortunately, that's also being supported by the FDA, which is pulling us into different committees to help further design those guidelines around non-invasive imaging. The biobank I told you about, it's 500,000 patients or from the population in the UK, 100,000 are being imaged. That's quite a data set for us to use, and we're getting some good evidence of the effectiveness of our data. Siemens Healthineers, we're on their app store. Again, I'm not expecting the revenue to flood in because of that, but you have a company like Siemens who's acknowledging that you're adding value. That's a big win for us when we're talking about credibility. And then GE, we have been on their MRI machines since 2016. So that means when it leaves the factory, our protocol is loaded on it. The clinician, when they're at the MRI, just has to push a button for the Amra protocol and everything is set up. Of course, we have an advisory board because we are a science and technology company. Having run a core lab, I have no interest in offering services beyond what we need to do at a bare minimum. I'd rather work with partners for delivering clinical trials. Anything that gets too service heavy starts to dilute the value. And I'm looking really for a technology valuation of this company. So it's important we have the science, and each person on our board, whether it's Claude in liver, Miriam for more metabolic, MSK, sarcopenia and muscle wasting, and then Jimmy Bell is our link into the UK Biobank. As I mentioned, we are being brought into different groups in the US as far as academic and corporate collaboration to determine how are we going to give the FDA the guidance they need for clinical trials, so that's nimble. And you'll see here this quote from Arun Sanyal in that conference I mentioned where he's saying we need to treat the entire body, not just the liver. Especially around liver disorders right now, there's such an issue where nobody knows what data is important. So they're really looking to get as much data as they can around it. Another piece of proof in our value is we had an obesity publication last May, and this was all off of the results of the UK Biobank. And we were able to show that if you had a high visceral fat and a low liver fat, you had a propensity for coronary heart disease, whereas if you had a high visceral fat and a high liver fat, you tended to become type 2 diabetic. With that being such a burden on the U.S. economy right now, there's a lot of people looking into fixing issues like that. January was a good month for us. So we were featured in National Geographic. This was their international publication. I'd like to tell you it was all the hard work I did or just joining that attracted them, but it was the result of our involvement in the UK Biobank. So the key takeaway that we were excited about was their comment that it's not the fat, it's where it's at. Because you have a lot of people that may look, or they are heavy, but they're metabolically healthy, obese. And then you have other people who you would call skinny fat, who may look healthy, but you don't know until you're seeing their body composition profile. So a little bit about what we're doing now. We're in clinical trials, and I'm looking to get to clinical use. But we have 4 areas where we're able to focus right now. And so when you're looking at each one of them, you have liver, you have wasting disorders, you have musculoskeletal, and you have metabolic. Each of those will have its own path to a clinical use. But what we're doing right now is answering to pharma, why would you include this? So when you're looking at a clinical trial with limited means, you need to understand what is the value we're bringing. So we have a holistic view of any metabolic regulated system. We have published data that shows our accuracy and precision. We're reducing the variability between and among reads. When I was a CEO of a CRO, we would have readers doing things at night, and they would refer to those as the Chardonnay reads. With image reading, you don't have variations. We also have the ability to take away any patient issues, where if you're doing a strength test and one day you're just not feeling well or you're tired, you're not going to be working as hard at that. When you're getting the imaging, it's very clear where you're able to measure certain things. For the liver specifically, there's no biopsy required. So when there's no biopsy, you're able to get these samples more often with less risk. You also get the ability to subphenotype from the imaging data that we're able to provide. And then also, because you're looking more holistically, you're getting a better shot at off-target outcomes. One example we had with one of our trials, although they were going for NASH, the drug wasn't working. They found it was great for weight loss, so now they're setting up trials for that. Around wasting, our imaging is able to show the decline before any type of strength testing, as I mentioned, but what it's also able to do is document either are you improving, declining, or are you simply able to stop any type of sarcopenic progression, which will also be important as drugs come out against that. For MSK, when you have a rotator cuff and a medical device surgery that you're going to do, you could have the best physician and the best device, but if you don't understand the muscles around the rotator cuff and there's too much muscle fat infiltration, you're not going to have a successful recovery. And then lastly with MSK, the chances of surgery and success are also around MFI, And with metabolic, you want to make sure that when you're doing a bariatric surgery, there's weight loss, which is healthy, and you're losing the right fat. As we're showing more and more of our ability with pharma, they're going to these bioinformatics companies looking for more of this information. They're coming to us as the channel to get it. Insurance companies are then watching that because they want to know, how does this affect my long-term costs of caring for a patient population? Not an Aetna insurance, but someone like a Kaiser Permanente in the US or a Geisinger Health, where they have patients for from 15 to 18 years. When I'm looking at this year, I see that we already have our pharma clinical trials working. I've got people on the ground in the US, Europe, and Japan. What I'm looking to do, and part of my messaging today, I want to work with the vendors to get into their workflows. I want to get into the health system so we can have pilots done that will lead to clinical trials to prove clinical utility. And then I want to make sure that the health IT companies are aware of the data we're able to provide, because when you have companies collecting all this data and selling it to pharma for a huge sum of money, I'd like to be part of that.